We ask analyst Carl Zha about the state of Sino-US relations. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Smith, originally from sunny California, now living in beautiful Beijing. Today's guest is friend of the show, Carl Zha, host of the Silk and Steel podcast. You can find him at Carl Zha, that's Z-H-A, on YouTube. He's an online influencer and geopolitical analyst. We ask him about the past, present, and future of China and the U.S. in this changing international order. So, how you doing today, Carl?
Hi, Jason. I didn't know you're from California. Where in Cali?
I'm from Modesto, Oakdale area in the Central Valley, but I spent about a decade in San Francisco, where you have one of your profile pics.
Okay, yeah, on my WeChat profile pics, yes. But I know Modesto. I drove through it before. Because I drive to. I think it's on 5, right? Is it on along the 5?
I think
I
it
don't
is.
know why
Yes.
I'm no. Yeah, then that must be why, because I would drive to see my sister in Bay Area from LA, and yeah, drive through the Central Valley.
You know, you should come up one. It's much more beautiful. You have the pristine view of the ocean. Oh my!
I did.
That's such a beautiful
I
drive.
Yeah. I love to drive on the one. If I have the time, I'll just spend the whole day just driving. I try to take my show my wife and my kids, but it was it was like we just didn't have enough time. You need like a good day or two, so you can like rest along the way and then really enjoy that scenery next time.
Yeah,
Well,
I imagine getting like a very nice sports car, like in the movies. It's got that vibe.
but I'm not going back to United States anytime soon. Not with what's going on right now.
Well, let's get into that.
Yeah, yeah.
You tell us about your time in the U.S. because I want to talk about your time in China, and I think you also lived in the United States. You're a U.S. citizen. Could you tell us about your time in the USA?
Well, I mean, I had a great time. I arrived in U.S. in 1990 when I was about 13 years old, and so I spent a good almost 30 years in the U.S. I went to high school, I went to college, I went to Caltech in Pasadena, and I
Wow.
work all over the country. Because my first job straight out of college is working for a software company, for their consulting services. So they will send me wherever the
You're a
client
tech
is.
bro.
Yeah, I was a tech bro. My first job was in Provo, Utah, of all the places. On my solo assignment. I just got out of college, so I had my driver license at 18, but I never actually drove because I didn't have a car. And the only time I drove in college was when my roommate got too drunk, and then I had to take over. So on my first assignment in Provo, Utah, I think I was like 21 or 22, and I couldn't even get a rental car from most of the rental companies because they wouldn't rent to you unless you had like 25 or something. And I saw only like I forgot one of those rental company. Only one would rent to me, and that was my first time getting on the freeway. So right after I get out the airport, and it sent me right on the freeway. It was quite exhilarating. My very first time on the freeway, and I drive into my job in Provo, Utah. It's an interesting place because Provo, Utah is like 90, I think like 95% Mormon, and it's a dry town. So the whole town kind of shuts down after 9 o'clock because no alcohol, right? So all the restaurant bars, nothing is open. So you just make sure you get your dinner early and then go home. But I enjoyed it because the Utah is one of the, I think somebody said it's like per square mile, probably one of the most beautiful places in United States. You have some very gorgeous national parks. So I travel all over the United States because of my job, and I enjoyed it. But it's I saw the writing on the wall, so to speak. I mean, like the back in before 2016, before Trump's first term, my surf buddy, always like they will joke, when they introduce me to a new surfing friend. They're like, oh, this guy he's from China, he's a communist, and we all laugh it off, right? Because it's a joke. But after the Trump turn, now it's not I don't know, it's not so funny anymore. Like those things. It's not fun to be accused of being a foreign agent, and so luckily I was on trip to Asia in 2018, 2019. I just decided to visit my family in China, and then take a tour to the rest of Asia. 'Cause I love to come to Bali. I heard it's a surfing paradise, and I fell in love, and I never left. And now looking back, I'm so glad I escaped from LA. Not by design, by accident, but I'm glad that happened.
Escape from LA, that's the movie. So you're living the movie.
I am.
Could we talk about your time growing up in China? You've mentioned it before, that I think you mentioned that your family was the first in the neighborhood to get a TV, and that the neighbors used to come over to watch your television. Could you tell us a little bit about, I guess, since you arrived in the United States in 1990, 1980s China?
Yeah, that was 1990, because my mom, she was both my mom and my dad. They were part of the so-called Sendang youth. They were sent to work in the Tibetan region of Western Sichuan, which is still part of the Tibetan plateau. My mom was working as a nurse at a high altitude pasture, and so she would save money, her salary, and then the money she saved, she used to buy my grandparents a black and white television back in Chongqing. I was sent to live with my grandparents. I was raised by my grandparents in Chongqing, and so at that time, that was the first black and white television in the whole neighborhood. So all the kids will come like right around, I don't know, like 6 o'clock in the evening, watching the evening news, CCTV, 新闻联播, and watch, and it was completely different times. At that time, you still have ration papers. You need ration papers to buy anything from cooking oil to sugar to meat. But things start to gradually relax, because then, I remember because I would tag along with my grandma to go shopping. And I remember the first year we would still go to like the government operated meat shop, butcher shop to get meat. But then the following year, she would just take me straight to like what China called farmers market, where like the farmers, they brought their produce straight from the farms, or some in the West call it a wet market, whatever. And then like they have everything. You don't need ration paper anymore. You just pay money and you get your food straight from the farms. So I witnessed how life was getting better year after year in China. By the time I came to U.S., the ration paper almost got completely phased out. They still have something. I think in the late '80s, they still have something like ration for rice, and each person in the family get an allotment of rice every month. And I actually get the most allotment of rice because I was a growing teenager. So my auntie will always send me to the government rice station. I remember carrying like a 10-kilo bag of rice back home in Chongqing. Those are my memories. Yeah, but I had a happy childhood.
I imagine that. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I imagine that.
No, you go. I insist.
Okay, I imagine that those ration papers would be worth a fortune, 20 years from now, and for museum or collectors, because that's even better than like a rare coin, because it's like a rare kind of currency.
You know what? More than ration paper will be the Mao badges, because I discovered like a whole treasure trove of Mao badges from my mom, from the Cultural Revolution days. I'm like, what the heck are we gonna do with this Mao badges? So we just sold them for scraps. we sent them to recycling stations, sold them for scrap. If we had kept them now, that would be worth a fortune. Those Mao badges would be worth a fortune. Yeah.
They sell the Mao badges in Yantai. I went to a collector's place where they have old coins, and the Mao badges were more expensive than the old coins. So yeah, they're already skyrocketing in price. Could you tell us a little bit about what does it mean to be, quote, sent down? And how did your family feel about it? What was that process like? What do you remember your mom and dad saying about it?
Well, this has happened during Cultural Revolution. So at that time, like after what people may know of Cultural Revolution in the West, there's Red Guard, which mostly composed of high school students and college students that were incited to overthrow the government, essentially, the government bureaucracy. But after a while, the Chinese government realized, okay, things got a little bit out of hand. So the decision was made to send these Red Guards to countryside to learn from peasants, to work along the peasants, to learn from peasants. And some of them not sent to countryside, but to sent to what they call frontier regions, remote areas. So my mom, she graduated as a nurse, and so right after she graduated, she was sent to with a bunch of other nursing graduates to the Tibetan region of Sichuan. So Western Sichuan is still part of the Tibetan plateau. There's several Tibetan autonomous regions. I think they went to Ganzi Tibetan Autonomous Region, and at the time that she went, the Tibetan rebellion hasn't finished yet. So this was 1960. I don't know, 1968. And so she was the first month she spent with a group of a unit of PLA soldiers to do military training, and then the soldiers were sent because there was rebellion breaking out, so the soldiers left them and my mom and just one PLA officer. So one time they heard a shot at night. They heard a gunshot, and so they all came out to see what happened. I don't know if you can broadcast this, but it turns out there was a nomad, a yak herder. He stopped by with a couple of Tibetan women, and he told the PLA officer, he said, "Well, I heard you have a bunch of women over here. Here, yeah, I have women. We can do an exchange." and then when the PLA officer explained, no, that's not how it's gonna happen. The herdsman thought he was bargaining. He said, okay, how about this? How about 2 for 1? 2 for 1. I will give you 2 women for 1 woman. and so that's when the PLA officer fired a warning shot, fire a gun. So tell him no, there's no deal, no human trafficking going on over here. So that was back in 1968, and then later my mom was my mom was pretty, so she was recruited to perform for the locals. They put up a dance and stuff. She was in a dance troupe that performed for the locals. And one day, one of the local Tibetans came to tell her, "Oh, last night your performance was great. The rebels, they came down from the mountains to watch your performance." And so she remembered, in 1972 when Nixon visited China, one of the part of the resolution was, Shanghai Communique. United States recognized Taiwan is part of China, and Beijing is the sole legitimate government of China, and U.S. pulled out its troops and its nuclear weapons from Taiwan. It also stopped cut funding to the Tibetan rebels that were based out of Nepal, and so in the early 70s, my mom distinctly remembered, the rebels coming down from the mountain to reconciliate with the government, and so I think that must happen after the Nixon visit, and these are just some story. My dad was sent there. My dad graduated from college, so she was one of the few people back in the 1960s to attend college. Maybe like less than 1% of the population at that time. And she went to a top engineering school in Jiao Tong University in Xi'an. And when they graduated, it's middle of the Cultural Revolution, and at that time, even up to 80s, when you graduate from college, the government assign you a job, assign where you go, and originally my dad was going to be assigned to some countryside in Sichuan, but his classmate was going to be assigned to the Tibetan Plateau, but his classmate didn't like to be assigned to Tibetan Plateau, so he somehow, worked his connections and got the posting in Sichuan countryside instead. So my dad got sent to the Tibetan Plateau, and when he first arrived, the local Communist Party secretary asked him, it's like, oh great, we need engineers, we need college students, this is awesome. So when my dad first arrived, the local Communist Party secretary was very excited. It's like, finally they're getting a college grads. And so he asked my dad, what's your major in college? My dad's like, oh, I'm an engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. The party secretary is like, engineer, great. We need roads. So he was assigned to build roads in the area until a few years later, they decide to build a hydroelectric dam on the reach of Dadu River. Then my dad finally was doing something that he was actually trained for, and so he spent his time building hydroelectric dams in the region. But anyway, that's how my parents met. They met on the Tibetan Plateau, and that's where I come from. And I was conceived there, but they, like many Chinese family at that time, my parents, they decided that I would receive better education if I was raised with my grandparents in Chongqing, because Chongqing is a big city. So after my mom gave birth to me, like after 3 months, she went back to work. She went back to her work unit, and I was left in the care of my grandparents. So I was raised by my grandma, like many Chinese children at that time. Like I didn't know what the concept of mother was, because when I was 3 years old, my mom came visit, and everyone's telling me, oh, your mom come to see me. I'm like, what is mom? They're like, that's the woman that gave birth to you. I'm like, what do you mean? My grandma gave birth to me. What is this blasphemy?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a heck of a story.
That was the times. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's that's amazing. Very colorful and vivid. Let's switch topics a bit. 2 sessions is coming up. And a lot of people in the United States have very strange perceptions about how China is managed. And they say there's no form of democracy. But, there is some degree of democracy in China. It's called whole process people's democracy. What do you make of China's democratic system?
Well, first of all, most people, especially in the English-speaking world, there's such a dearth of knowledge about China. People don't even realize there's actually direct elections at village level. Every village chief in China are directly elected by the villagers. I bet most people outside of China don't even know that. And this is a part of the kind of the democratic experiment that started in China in 1980s. They thought, okay, well, let's start small. if it works, then we can scale up. This is how they created special economic zones, for example. They created special economic zone first in Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and several coastal cities. And once they introduced market economy and realized, okay, this actually works, then they started to start market reform in the rest of China. Now, with what they discovered with the election was that you work best. The direct democracy works best at the village level. When everybody know everybody. When you try to, it doesn't scale up very well. Because I did remember they tried experiment like election for vice mayor in my hometown of Chongqing, which is like a city of tens of millions of people. So this is why to this day they have direct election on the village level, but on more like township level and city level, it's more indirect. It's more it's via indirect election. And what they have is they also put into a place like a monitoring system, right? So to hold the officials responsible, and this has developed over time. There's actually a great collaboration of CGTN and PBS that talks about how these college students were sent as monitors. Go to villages, go to townships. They will do audit and make sure those mayors village heads were doing their job. It was a great documentary on the kind of the village level democracy in China, but it was pulled from the U.S. TV network,
Wow.
because the U.S. congressman. People can look it up. I can't remember the name now. It's a great documentary. It actually shows how it works at the grassroots level, and now, and now there's a difference in kind of the government responsiveness, right? And people now can see in many places. I saw several posts on social media. They complain they have hotlines, the government hotlines, where you can complain about a particular problem. One guy complained about one blogger, one social influencer. He put out a video complaining about I think it was man covers, was like the man covers that was improperly placed, or there wasn't enough safety measure around for the man covers. And to his own surprise, apparently the city officials saw his post and they addressed that issue within like a week. And then they have a foreign blogger, who also raised an issue about these poles. These poles, like I don't know, it's like the light poles or whatever. They were improperly placed at they're kind of in the middle of the pedestrian sidewalk. So it's inconvenience or inconvenience for the pedestrian. Again, to his surprise, within days, that problem was addressed. They removed the light pole. These are just examples how the Chinese government can be very, very responsive.
I want to do that now. I want to go and find some sort of structural problem. There's nothing in my neighborhood specifically, but I could go further afield, and then I record myself calling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, see what happens. Go back a week.
That's
later.
a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know. I think it might be
people.
different in different cities. I'm not sure, but in Beijing, it's definitely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can complain about that kind of stuff, or you could say I don't like the way the law. I don't think that motorcycles should be allowed to ride on the sidewalks, which is something I've always wanted to do, but I've just never bothered to call. I want to talk about China's planning. So this is one of the things that people attribute China's success to. China makes excellent plans, whereas we in the U.S., we're constantly electing someone different with a different set of plans. So Do you have any thoughts about China's 15th five-year plan and just how China's planning mechanism works in general?
Well, yeah, I mean, China always adopted the kind of the 5-year plans from Soviet Union, but these plans it's always a work in progress. You know, this has always been refined. To give you an example, like I heard the story, you know, back in Cultural Revolution from my dad's friend, you know, who was assigned to Chongqing from Shanghai, because at that time, because of the Cold War, China thought, you know, in a World War III scenario, you will have to, you know, all the coastal city would not be safe because you will be exposed to the U.S. bombardment. So all the city, and also there was tension with Soviet Union in the north. So all this, they're trying to relocate all the industry, particularly defense industry, to southwest, to including city of Chongqing, where I was born. And so this guy, my dad's friend, was assigned from Shanghai to Chongqing to work in arms munition factory. And one of their first job was to build a giant munition factory under a mountain. So they dug tunnels deep into the mountain and built a whole structure. And then later, because, you know, during Cultural Revolution, there's ups and downs, like leadership often get purged, so they get a new leader, and the leader says, well, that is a ridiculous plan. Who approved this? If one direct hit, the whole mountainside will just blow up. You know, like this is so they scrapped the whole plan, and so the moral of the story, when my dad's friend was telling us that story, his thing was, oh, everything is subject to change to the leadership. Well, that was the time before, during Cultural Revolution, and today I think the approach has been much more systematic. You know, like I said, you know, they had several decades to work things out, and what usually happens is the top leadership in Beijing, they usually set up a vision, where the country should go. You know, maybe the country should plow more investment into the high-end manufacturing. You know, so countries the China as a whole can escape the middle income trap. That setting up the plan, setting up the vision, but actual implementation is left to the local government, local mayors. You know, the local mayors, they actually have a lot of autonomy to actually on how to achieve these plans. You know, the government official in China, they're evaluated by metrics. This has been done the way, you know, since imperial times. All the government officials are being evaluated on their performance on a routine basis. But these criteria change, of course. You know, for a time, the criteria for evaluating government official is economic growth, right? GDP growth. So how they achieve GDP growth, again, that was left to the local government to figure out. And around 2012, around 2012, that's when around the same time President Xi Jinping assumed office. The goal is now shifted to sustainable development. It's like, let's not just be totally in blind pursuit of growth for the sake of growth. Let's make sure that our environment is also taken care of, right? One of the issue at that time was a lot of the Chinese cities were horribly polluted. There was a lot of pollution. So what President Xi did is make a top priority that we should clean up the environment. So that became also one of the criteria to judge, part of the judging metrics for the local mayors. You know, how much you can improve the air quality, for example. And so I mean, the result speaks for itself for people who have been China for a long time. You know, have seen how much the air have improved over time. But this is how the system is made to be responsible yet flexible. People outside of China, they think Xi Jinping is like micromanaging every details of China. That's not how it works. The top leadership usually just set the goals, sets a vision, and the actual implementation of these goals are left up to the local government to do. And again, the local government not completely left alone to do whatever they want. They still have monitoring process put in place to make sure they're actually doing their job, right? Like I mentioned that documentary where they send college students to go audit the local government. Yeah, that's an example.
You're the first person I've talked to who's mentioned that in the dynastic periods of China, that this system of judging local officials by metrics existed. And you do know a lot more about Chinese history than most of the guests that I have on. So this is a continuity of Chinese civilization. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. But, there's big difference between imperial time and today. One of the biggest difference is, aside from ideology and government structure, is information. It's a lot harder back in imperial times to actually monitoring what's going on in each region of the empire. There's so many ways that the information channel can be gained. But today with internet and social media, it's a lot harder for official to obfuscate and fake data. Right, and this I think that does make a big difference, and so this is why people. I remember the Westerners always judging China like, oh, China, all the data is fake, right? It's like, but this is why the former Prime Minister Li Keqiang came out with the Li Keqiang Index. He said what, you just look at. There are some figures that will be hard to fake, like electricity consumption, right? It's going to be really hard to fake electricity. The import-export figures, right? Because there's import figure, export figure. Also, you can verify against the countries that you are exporting to or importing from. So today, in modern times, the central government has. I think they have more resources to actually get an overall sense of the picture and to respond accordingly than, say, like in the back old days, imperial days. Back then they have to depend more on maybe the honesty of each individual governor. Today, the institution itself is much more robust.
Well, that's very illuminating. I want to switch to Sino-U.S. relations a little bit. Now, actually, before we get directly to that, I want to talk about global perceptions of China. One of the reasons I think people are migrating towards appreciating China globally, and there was a new study that came out recently. It was 79% of those surveyed in countries around the world preferred China to the U.S. in some way, in some metric. And a lot of that is because China rose peacefully. China doesn't go around engaging in wars all of the time, whereas the U.S. obviously were engaged in multiple wars all the time. But at the same time, the U.S. bombed Venezuela and killed 100 people, about. Then it kidnapped the elected president of that country. And at the same time, the people who love China were saying things like, why didn't China intervene? Could you address that?
Well, China has been very consistent in its foreign policy. It operates under the principle of non-intervention, which says, we will do business with any recognized government, legitimate, internationally recognized government. But what happened to that country is, that's to be handled by people of that country, how they determine their path. And also, China is not, people are so used to the U.S. hegemony where U.S. interfere all over the globe that they kind of expect China to be like the doppelganger of United States, just interfere on, maybe on their behalf. But that's never how that's not how China operates, and never it has never been how China operates. Deng Xiaoping gave a very famous speech at the United Nations in 1974. Actually, he said, if anytime China become a superpower like United States today, that's intervening everywhere, then every one of you in the audience and have a responsibility to overthrow this China together with the Chinese people. But that is the sentiment. That's a deeply held sentiment, also inside China as well, by the common Chinese people. The China's engagement with the world, you expect to be on a level basis of equality, of reciprocality. You will certainly try to help friendly countries, to fight for their independence, etc. But they should not expect a kind of a Cold War style proxy war. That's because that's not how China envisioned the world. Right now, it's the United States that's trying to impose a Cold War 2.0. China just wants a stable, peaceful world where everybody conducts a bilateral relationship on a fair basis, and also, no, we're talking about intentions right here. Right? China, first of all, has no intention to play the role of a global hegemon, and second of all, let's be realistic here. Even if China want to do that, China is not like United States. China do not have the power projection all the way across the globe. China do not have military bases all over the world. Even if China want to project power, how are they going to do it? They don't have naval bases in Cuba. They don't have naval bases in Venezuela. They don't have naval bases in Brazil, and I don't think China has any plans to create those naval bases, military bases. Then what's the difference between China and the United States? And I think that's what people need to recognize. China is not out there to be like a global savior or global hegemon, but China will be there to help enable economic growth, to build up infrastructure, to help country to grow out of poverty, to create more global interconnectivity. And that is China's role in the world. That's how China sees its role in the world.
Well, I hope a lot of people can hear the last answer that you gave, because I think that really summarizes the geopolitics of China's position and intention very, very accurately. I want to talk about the U.S. and China a bit here. There are a lot of different discussions and interpretations of how the geopolitical economy is developing, what the new international order looks like. Words like multipolarity are being thrown around. The United States is containing China. There's no doubt that there are bases all around China that the United States has, and the United States has not drawn those down. At the same time, the United States has put out a white paper that it's being interpreted many different ways by many different people, saying that the United States' intention is to withdraw to its own hemisphere, and I believe it means the Americas, which is not actually a hemisphere, but it's the Don Roe Doctrine, right? That's what people are calling it. But at the same time, nothing, the U.S. is not, withdrawing from the rest of the world. It is withdrawing from institutions. And Trump recently sent a flotilla, or I guess a navy to Iran. And the United States has been active in places outside of the Americas. How do you interpret how this new world order is shaping up? Are we in multipolarity, or are we in something else?
Well, I will quote Marco Rubio, Secretary of State of the United States. He said, we're in the multipolar world. I mean, I think the U.S. governing elite is recognizing that, and they're recognizing the resource limit that's facing by the American imperial overreach. It's not that they don't want to do American empire anymore. They just want to do it smarter, and by their reckoning, they should concentrate their resources to shore up the U.S. position in the West Hemisphere, in the Americas. And this, again, we haven't heard Monroe's Doctrine for a while until now, because the Monroe Doctrine was put out in the 19th century, when in fact it was a multipolar world. Monroe Doctrine was put out specifically to warn the European powers not to come to Americas. Mostly British, and this is U.S. staking out its claim to be a regional power. And right now, like the for a while, we're not talking about Monroe Doctrine in the United States, because U.S. no longer sees itself limited as a regional hegemon. It sees itself as the world hegemon. The whole world is its hemisphere, and now they're refocusing on Americas, on what they consider United States neighborhood. Precisely, I think it's they're recognizing that in the new multipolar world, that U.S. need to shore up its position in its own neighborhood, to become the regional hegemon first, before branching out to do the global hegemon thing. That doesn't mean they have given up on the aspiration to be the global hegemon. It's just that this is a tactical retreat, so to speak, where they want to. This is why also Donald Trump want to go after Greenland, right? Because it's all part of America's, and he doesn't really care about the Europe or the NATO, and he because he doesn't think that European and NATO can be relied upon. That's why he needs to seize Greenland. Even though United States already have access to Greenland through the arrangement of NATO, and security arrangement with Europe. So in a lot of ways, at least the Donald Trump administration no longer sees that U.S. can dominate the world through the post-war international order that U.S. had itself helped constructed, and so I think it doesn't mean they have given up on their aspiration to eventually be the global hegemon again, and this is why he's still interfering in places like Iran, which is well beyond the West Hemisphere. And one of the things they do is by deprioritizing China as the top national security threat. It doesn't mean that U.S. gave up on containing China, but there is a difference between the will and their capability, right? The U.S. has always wanted to contain China, but I think by now, we're in 2026, it's pretty obvious to everyone that China will not be contained. And U.S. still very much like to contain China, but I think that ship has already sailed. Maybe 20 years ago it would have been possible, before United States disastrously pivot to the war, the so-called Great War on Terror, to wreak havoc in Middle East. But now it's too late. China cannot be contained. So now U.S. is trying to shore up its own bargaining position, so to speak.
I want to talk about logistics and interconnectivity. We have, previously, 5 years ago, the United States and many people in the United States were talking about decoupling and reshoring. How is that working out? How is Donald Trump's tariff war on the world going? Is China being decoupled from the international system?
Well, so what we saw was, when they talk about friendshoring, first of all, they were the claim is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. That was never happening, because what they ended up doing is pressuring multinationals to move their supply chain out of China, but into neighboring countries like Southeast Asia, maybe India, etc. What has happened is even with the companies that did move operation out of China, it just means it's brought these new regions to integrate with the Chinese supply chain. Because even with for example, the Apple's new operation in India, they still need to import Chinese tools, Chinese machine tools. Same thing was happening in Vietnam. This all the end customer goes to United States for sure. I mean, you may leave from the ports of Vietnam or India, but all these countries are still sourcing their intermediate goods from China. They still need all the capital equipment from China, and so in effect, it's actually pushing the Chinese supply chain outward. Now it's the Southeast Asia region is now more tightly integrated with the Chinese supply chain.
That's fascinating. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. ASEAN's biggest trading partner is China, and vice versa. So it looks like it has not worked for the United States to isolate China. Rather, it's integrated China into the global supply chains even more than it already was. China is becoming increasingly self-reliant for technology in every field. There are hardly any technologies left that can be made outside of China in a better way, like maybe very particular kinds of semiconductors, or maybe some space technology that SpaceX is particularly good at. But China also recently, leadership in China said they want to be the world's market. They want to buy things from the world. How do we see China's increasing self-reliance and wanting to become the market? How can we synthesize these two ideas?
Yeah, first of all, China actually do import a lot. It's just that China export great deal to countries, developed markets like United States and EU, right? But China also imports great deal of commodities from global South, and countries like Australia, for example. Right, all these countries have benefited from China's rise, from the rise of the Chinese manufacturing superpower, and if you look at this, and Chinese Prime Minister actually made a good point that China didn't set out to have a large trade surplus. The idea that China now aims to be the world's largest market. This is actually a big deal because for a while, the U.S. main strength is to act as the world's largest market. So a lot of economies are depending on their trade relationship with the United States. Now, if China were to become world's largest market, China will naturally display United States from that role, and that China will be the linchpin of the world economy. And I think that's going to happen. We're just, it's a matter of sooner or later. And as you mentioned, because China has already moved into advanced manufacturing, also moving the forefront of the technological innovation. And this is a lot of the lower, more labor-intensive, low-margin manufacturing is already leaving China to countries like Southeast Asia and other parts of the global South that I have mentioned as being tightly integrated into the Chinese supply chain. So Chinese trade and Chinese development already benefited those nations, the nations of the global South. I think it would just matter of time. There's a lagging effect when it comes to places like EU and America. But first of all, they also have to address some internal trade barriers they put up, because one of the reasons for the trade deficit is these countries are not selling to China what the China actually like to purchase from them. I'm talking about semiconductor equipments, and these are by design. Like if they really care about trade deficit, they would allow China to buy these products, to offset the deficit. But that's not what they really care about. They really care about just maintain their dominance and primacy. I think with the growth of China is right now in nominal dollar terms the largest economy in the world. But I think in realistic terms, China is likely is already the largest economy in the world. And not only that, but it's likely twice as large as the U.S. economy. If you go by the matrix, as I mentioned, like electricity consumption, China produced twice as much electric power than United States, and that gap is still growing. And China also has China already the world's largest auto market, and 30 million cars are being sold in China, almost twice the number of cars sold in the United States. I mean that gap continued to grow. So I think it's just a matter of time when China became the world's largest market for yeah.
I want to talk about the U.S. again and China and how in your vision, how they can cooperate. Because, you're an American, you're also, you have family in China. Obviously, this is something you think about. It seems to me that AI is the big bet in, financialized markets in the United States. And if AI doesn't succeed, we're looking at a gigantic bubble exploding all over the world. But the United States doesn't have the energy to continue. It's a huge bottleneck for AI development. And China does produce all of these energy products like solar and wind and so forth. It seems to me, maybe there's something I don't understand, but it seems to me that the United States should be begging China to export solar to the United States rather than tariffing it and banning it. How do you see the United States coming to the table in the next few years to bring JVs or imports from China in to help solve the energy crisis in the United States?
But Jason, Trump just said that China has no wind power, no wind farm. It's all. So there's United States and a lot of part of the U.S. elite are still in deep denial about the nature of both China and United States. Obviously there's a lot of potential area of cooperation, as you mentioned, but again. The U.S. elite have to give up on that mentality of zero-sum competition and that bug for global hegemony and primacy, and that will take time. I think there is already a shift. You recently saw Canada, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney went to China and he removed a lot of trade barriers against the Chinese EVs, and in return, China lowered the tariff on Canadian canola oil and other commodities. And that could be a template for a lot of the Western countries to follow. I'm talking about Europeans and maybe eventually United States as well. Because there are products that China would like to source from U.S. It's just like U.S. is the one that says no. You can only buy soybeans, and China's you know what, forget it. We'll buy soybean from Brazil. It really has to come from change inside United States. It has to come from the people to adopt a more pragmatic approach to China. I think that will take time. I don't know if it's going to happen next year or next 2 years, but over long term, I'm talking about decades. I think eventually pragmatism will prevail, even in the United States. But we already saw some hopeful signs. Survey after survey shows that young people in America have much more positive perception of China than their older generations, and the future belongs to them.
One of the things that this show tries to do is bring China and the U.S. together. That's really one of our big purposes here. As someone who's been to both countries a lot, what kind of advice would you give Americans who are considering traveling to China?
Oh, do it, no doubt. I mean, just come and visit and see for yourself. Don't let yourself be blindsided by, all the mainstream media propaganda. I know a lot of Americans don't even believe in legacy media on most of the things. Why would you believe them when it comes to China, right? So see for yourself. See how it is. China is a great place to visit. It has a lot to offer, a lot to see, and you will probably be pleasantly surprised, for a lot of the first comers. And they made it so much simpler, like even the Canadians are now going to get visa free to China. But so if you're a dual citizen, if you hold your Canadian passport or European passports, you can already come to China visa free. Or even if you're only if you only have U.S. passport, you can come to China visa free for 10 days,
Yeah, that's right.
for the transit visa. Yeah, for the transit visa, as long as you leave China for a third country, you can come in and go, come for a 10-day visit. I think that's enough to get a taste. If you spend 10 days in Shanghai or Beijing, you will give a good taste of what China is like in the 21st century.
There's another thing they did. It used to be that you have to book your hotels and air flights before you apply for the visa to come to China. Now you don't have to have any kind of itinerary if you're applying for a travel visa to China. And it used to be you have to go to the consulate to apply, and then you have to go back to the Chinese consulate to get your visa. Now you apply online, and you only send your passport to the consulate after they've approved your travel to China. So you only have to go once to the official consulate in the United States if you're applying. So it is a little bit easier. I also wanted to ask you, you've traveled around a lot. Obviously, you've returned to Chongqing, your hometown, but you've also recently been to Xinjiang. I'm not sure what other cities that you've traveled to. Could you name one or two or three places that you highly recommend that people come and visit in China?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, definitely go to Shanghai, because Shanghai is still for Westerners one of the most accessible mainland Chinese cities. And then go travel to Beijing, of course, because it has a lot of cultural legacy. Travel to Shenzhen, because that's a next frontier in technology. Travel to my hometown Chongqing, because it's a great, not just because I was born there, but because it's one of the hot internet celebrity city in China. People call it the cyberpunk city. It does have a lot to offer. Travel to Hangzhou. Hangzhou it's just only like a less than an hour from Shanghai by train, and it's the headquarters of Alibaba, a beautiful West Lake, and one of the beautiful cities in China. But there's so many places in China. I mean, one visit will not be enough. I've been to Xinjiang. I highly recommend. But Xinjiang is so huge. We spent 2 weeks, drove around 3,500 kilometers just around southern part of Xinjiang. We haven't even come to the northern part of Xinjiang, which may happen this year. But yeah, I would just go for one visit, pick one or two cities. If you like it, you can always return. If you're American, get the 10-year multi-entry visa. That's what I got. So you only have to do it once, and then you can go anytime you like. Unlimited. Multi-entry anytime, and it's easy to, once you have the visa. All you have to do just travel to a neighboring place, or go to Hong Kong for a day trip, and then your visa gets reset, and then you can come back to mainland China, like many people do. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for your time. I always learn a lot from you personally. I'm sure the fans do too. Thank you for your time, Carl Zha.
Thank you, Jason. Anytime.